Good morning. My name is Venkat Pullela. I lead technology side of networking at Keysight. I'm here with John from NVIDIA and Manoj from Marvell. Today we're going to talk about open programmable infrastructure, and then how we can work with OCP and and the rest of the community. So just to give you an overview of who we are, this is a Linux Foundation project. Looking at all of infrastructure, and then the whole goal of what we are trying to do is to foster a community-driven, open standards, open ecosystem, especially focused on DPU and IPU-like technologies, right? So you've seen NICs and smart NICs and technology evolution in that area, and I think we are seeing emergence of DPUs and IPUs focused on accelerating infrastructure workloads, as well as our infrastructure part of the workload, as well as the data processing side of the workloads are coming up, and they're creating a new form factor of sorts. So our focus is to really build open ecosystem around it, open APIs about it, and we'll get into a little bit of details on what all we are trying to do there. So these are all the founding members of OPI, and then more and more companies are joining in. We have a set of premier members who are all part of the governing board, and there are a lot of others who are joining to contribute to various working groups and projects. And this is a growing list. This is as of now. So what are our goals, right? So as the smart NICs are evolving into these IPU, DPU-like architectures, what is changing uniquely is that there is a clear trust boundary between where you can run your workloads, your bare metal VM, and then your IPU, DPU-based NIC cards can have a completely isolated trust boundary around it, while accelerating some of the workloads from some of the workloads, right? So that's the primary background. And then we are, as we discussed, we are trying to make sure that we are creating a community-driven, vendor-agnostic APIs for some of the functionality and some of the offloads that we want to place on these DPUs and IPUs, right? And then again, our goal, one of the core tenets is also to reuse what is out there. We are not trying to reinvent anything or rebuild anything if it is already out there. We really want to collaborate with there are lots of open source projects out there. Even some of the non-open source also, there's a lot of technologies that we may try to adopt if there's a lot of progress and a lot of value there, and try to create an open standard and standard interface. So you will see a lot of focus on that. And then we are not a standards body. We are trying to define APIs. And then on top, we are also trying to build implementation examples. We are trying to build reference implementations. Maybe to start with one vendor reference implementation, and then over a period you will see multiple vendors supporting the same APIs and build multiple implementations, so that you could make sure they're all interoperating. So these are the primary goals for us. And why we are here is because, of course, I mean, OCP, and I don't want to repeat what the value OCP creates is fantastic. I think it's only getting enhanced with the work and the collaboration with Linux Foundation. So we are a Linux Foundation project. To start with, we are operating in higher layer softwares, but there is a tight linkage you can see through APIs all the way into the DPUs, IPUs. So we see a lot of value in collaborating and finding common areas of interest, and also I hope we will see more and more folks joining OPA projects, and some of the OPA project members joining OCP, so there's a lot of for us to do. So at the highest level, I think OCP is standardizing the form factors and hardwares. Of course, there's a lot of APIs also, right? Look at SI, right? But I think when the programmability aspect comes in, and especially focused on IPUs, DPUs, and especially focused on infrastructure as a whole, I think there is something that we are trying to build, and that's where a lot of synergy could be there, right? And then the areas where, if you see what are the what kind of workloads or what kind of infrastructure acceleration is being moved into IPUs, DPUs, networking, storage, security, virtualization. These are the primary 4 areas to cover the whole of infrastructure. So in terms of how we are structured, it's not any different than what you might have seen. Typical, we have a board of directors to give a direction. We have an outreach committee to kind of go and talk to all the other ecosystems we really want to connect to. We have a steering committee giving the technical and architectural direction, but the real work is happening in 4 technical working groups, right? And then I'm showing you a little bit of deliverables of what we are trying to produce. It's a mix of some open source code, APIs, but to put a structure around it, standardize the APIs, and then make sure there is at least one reference implementation so that somebody can take it and go from there, right? It may take a while for us before we go to a completely open source ecosystem, right? In the sense that you may not find a completely open source implementation like Sonic yet, but we want to walk, run, and before we get there, right? And then I kept some links here so for some of the folks who are on the, looking at it a little later, on how do we reach, where is our GitHub location, where you can find them. And I just want to give you a little bit of overview of the technical working groups and what they are working on, the scope. And then this is supposed to be birds of feather session, so I will give enough time for us to discuss or take questions, right? So the provisioning lifecycle working group is looking at, how do we identify, how do you discover all these devices and their capabilities, and how do we provision them, right? And we are getting into typical issues as we start looking at it, like the root of trust discussion that happened yesterday. So, right, and so these are the areas that I see already where we can start taking what is existing and start using that. We already started looking at, we adopted open telemetry because already existing, and we evaluated multiple choices out there in a systematic way, and we said, hey, we are going to reuse open telemetry than build our own. We also are reusing or adopting secure ZTP, right? ZTP and secure ZTP makes it even more secure. And so like that, right? We are looking at technologies that will help us bring these IPU, DPU provisioning and lifecycle management. And we found a few more here in this conference. So we are going to come back and talk to those teams and add to that. So that is that group. API and behavioral model is, there are multiple contributions from different companies already over there. Idea is to come up with a common API so that when you have these IPUs, DPUs from multiple vendors, they work across. So our idea is to start building object models at some point of time. These APIs are not only host facing, which is kind of northbound, as well as how do you interact with the underlying hardware, right? And that's where we have an API definition. We may have a vendor-specific reference implementation, right? So that's what we're looking at. We're also standardizing on taxonomy because there's so many terms out there in terms of IPUs, DPUs, XPUs, function accelerator cards, SmartNIC. There are a lot of acronyms. So we're trying to define standardize some terms, as well as the semantics of some of these terms, so that that will help us as a group, right? So that is the work that's happening there. So whatever we define to make the developer's life easy, we are building a developer platform. We are planning to build a multi-vendor lab where interoperability can be tested at some point. So in the beginning, we would look at it as more of a reference implementation, testing the functionality. We are considering the UNH at this point. If any of you have any other suggestions, we really love to hear that from you. But ultimately, what that would have is that you will have a virtual as well as hardware-based POC lab or a workbench where you can try any new features that we are adding to OPA as we build it incrementally. And we already have some pieces of software already there that you can go to our GitHub and download and start testing something on the storage. You can play with something we have on the networking that you already have that you can start playing with, right? And of course, CI/CD is something that need not be said. In terms of use cases, right? So this is all great. We'll build all these APIs. Who will use it, right? So you're working with the industry partners, the real users out there, trying to surface the use cases, what would be useful for them. And then what we find so far is, of course, there's a high area of interest, interest in the storage security, AML, definitely based on some of what we all do here. All the vendor companies are heavily focused on those areas. And then we started agreeing on few use cases to get started with. OVS, OVN offload may not sound like a use case, but it kind of forms a foundation for a lot of things to be built on top. So we adopted that, and we are working on that. On the storage side, we're trying to look at everything. Storage over fabric has taken off in a big way and is very practical as of now. So we're trying to do a bridge between NVMe PCIe to NVMe TCP bridge. On the security side, trying to start with something simple. There is a basic firewall with a simple rule-based filtering use cases. So there are 2 or 3 of the use cases where we're going to get started. So if you are somebody who is really trying to adopt a standard-based IPU, DPU technologies, you have some use cases, we really want to hear from you. Please join the either email lists or you will. I have some links at the end on how you can get in touch with us. We really want to hear from you to make sure that what OPI is building is useful for the community. Showing current activities, we already touched upon a little bit. So I'm going to skip that. In terms of maybe we can get to call to action a little end. We wanted this to be a birds of feather kind of session with more Q&A and then I have some links here so that even if you miss it, you can go back and look at the slides on the website or video on how to reach, how to join OPI. We are looking for folks. It's still coming up. While there's a good momentum, there are more and more people.
Yeah, I think we
projects.
can start taking some questions and to get the discussion going. Anybody has questions? Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Venkat.
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Not an expert here, but what are the competing standards? Would SPDK or IPDK be similar standards? And if that is a yes, then why would one organization or company choose one or the other, and what are the differences?
I don't think those are necessarily competing standards. That's a great question. So I think before there were different standards like SPDK, like IPDK, OVS, OVN, and these were just all standards that existed independently. And OPI is actually looking at including or working with incorporating some of these standards as well as other standards and interfaces in. So I don't see it as competition. I mean, of course, OPI could come up with a different, say, something else and say, hey, this is better than SPDK. Everyone should use this instead. And then it would be a competing standard. But I don't think that's very likely. I think they're going to, it's more likely we'll be incorporating things like IPDK and SPDK into OPI.
What would be the definitions of APIs, right? One versus the other. Why would I choose one or the other if they're not competing? Are they complementary? Are they redundant? I'm just trying to understand why you pick one standard over the other. Why do you want to advocate for OPI versus something else?
Yeah, so
go ahead.
Shall I? So I think, right, what the whole idea is that I think all these vendors have this very specialized hardware with lots of unique bells and whistles, right? And it's hard to get away from, and they want to expose it and make sure that they get the value, they want to create the value for their customers, right? I don't think we can get away from either APDK being built or a DOCA from NVIDIA getting built, right? They're really useful, that's the way people use it. I think what OPI is trying to do is to create a shim layer of sorts on top and then create a common API. So we will strive to come up with common APIs that make sense in collaboration with, if you see all the companies out there, right? So they all have their own standard, right? But I think this OPI is about bringing a common API that can work across all the vendors. in the beginning, there'll be a standard API, and then while building the standard API, we want to collaborate. We don't want to reinvent somebody who is a storage expert at NVIDIA or a storage expert in Intel or any other place, right? I think if they bring in and they can influence the common API to storage. And then each vendor might use that, right? Somebody may map that to Docker, somebody may map that to SPDK, and maybe some more things. So I think OPI is trying to make it easy for people to consume this technology, and there's a lot of potential, and that's how it's going to be beneficial to all of community. Right?
And I would maybe add to it is it's not just about standardizing APIs, but what would be really good for the whole industry is even doing, setting up hardware labs, enabling production deployments, right, with these standards. Another reference is IPDK. I think this is public information. Will be contributing to, or all the contributions will be merged into OPI, right? Same thing on the NVIDIA side. This is all public information. So I think if you step back and look at everybody was doing different things, but now is really that trigger point, right? The industry needs this kind of standardization because everybody is talking about future data centers being composable. Because you look at any application, right? You cannot get the right mix of resources for any workload or application. So the best architecture in data center is enabling composability, and DPUs are the best for doing, right? For not just provisioning, but taking care of security, booting the DPU in a standard way, irrespective of the vendor, right? I mean, there is a lot of development happening in that space as well with Calyptra announcement yesterday and so on. So it's very exciting time to be part of this effort.
Yeah, and to go to your question, is that Don, by the way? Oh, hey, Don. So I think to your question about which API, what if you're comparing APIs? I think when you evaluate APIs, often there are three major criteria. One is performance and functionality. Some APIs might have better performance or address different feature sets than others. There's a question of compatibility. Ideally, you want an API that addresses multiple vendors, it supports, supported by multiple vendors and works with different hardware from different vendors. And there's also the level. I mean, some APIs are more low level and some are higher level. So like OVS is a little bit lower level. But something like, I think, IPDK or Dokaflow from NVIDIA, these are like higher level. And in some cases, you want a choice of both, so that some developers want to program at a low level for maximum control and performance, and other developers want to maybe use the same functionality and the same hardware, but program at a higher level API to get faster development and simpler development. And in many cases, they'll get performances almost as good or very close to using a low-level API.
Cool. Thank you. Hanif.
Thanks a lot, Venkat. Great talk. I guess my question is along the same lines as Don's, is that, which we have not really touched on this one. And we talked about all the different interfaces like IPDK or SPDK or Docker and so forth. But as you know, you've also been involved in the Dash project, right? And the Dash is also an open source project. Yep. It is defining also the behavior models as well as the SAI APIs for it.
Yep.
So again, are we trying to collaborate with them? Yeah. Much like other things that you talked about. Yeah.
So we have a big list of all the communities out there, as well as individual companies to really go and collaborate with, and we are doing it systematically. Dash is very relevant for us because it already has a fantastic ecosystem around it. There is an automated, rather a P4 specification of a network, and from that these APIs are generated. So there's a lot of good work there. The intent is to definitely work with it. I think we are planning on doing a Dash presentation at OPI in one of the use case working groups. It would have been this week, but because of OCP, maybe it's going to happen later. But absolutely, the intent is to not really go and reinvent anything, but we will reuse what Dash is doing. Dash has at this point has a networking focus and is slowly adding other things. So whereas here there may be a lot more on storage, whatnot, and the P4 may not directly apply to storage side, right? I mean, as of now, you can't describe your storage network. Maybe you can describe the storage network with P4, but there are some aspects that P4 needs to be enhanced also. So all those things are areas of collaboration for us, and we definitely intend to work with the Dash fairly closely. Want to add anything there?
You covered it well.
Wonderful talk. Thanks for that. A quick question on the roadmap of OPI. Like, when do you see, like, for example, some of the use cases that mentioned? I'm guessing that it's going to be use case driven roadmap. So when do you see, like, storage or like NVMe OAuth for an AI ML workload to be actively be able to use OPI? Like, do you see some sort of roadmap in terms of like 2 years from now or something like that?
Yeah, so the question is on the roadmap, right? So while we are definitely, I mean, if you have specific use cases you want us to prioritize, please come work with us, right? Anyone who has, and we're actively talking to different companies as well as ecosystems, right? So we are starting with the 2 or 3 use cases you saw, right? And they will be built. And we keep saying it's not going to be production ready because we are not a full-fledged open source project where you will find everything open source like Sonic and then it comes up and all that, right? So I think you will have a reference implementation and then that you can use it, but right, even if you put it in red, bold, blink of don't use it in production, somebody will use it in production. We're definitely afraid of that. But I think what you should expect is a clear API and one reference implementation and one of the vendors, right? Whoever has implemented it first, or and as a group, right? I think each of the companies have resources allocated, so some things will move in certain use cases faster because that company has contributed that. I think that's what you should expect. And then these are the 2-3 use cases you have. We don't have like a specific timeline because even on the API side, we are defining sets of APIs one at a time. Networking, there is a lot of discussion going on. Right, Intel is active there, Pensando, now AMD, they're very actively contributing, which again comes from a lot of experience learned from Dash, right, NVIDIA. So everyone is bringing their knowledge of networking and talking around networking and how that need to be stabilized along with the use cases. So you will start seeing outcomes in terms of APIs as well as use cases, right? And then you saw the set of use cases we have. I don't know, did I answer you? So it's not like an open source, we have a release cadence. We do have release and versioning cadence on the APIs as well as the reference implementation, not on like a product quality that you can deploy in your network yet.
The only thing I would
Go ahead.
maybe add is that if you look from an industry level, right, people have been offloading some of these workloads onto DPU, IPU-like devices, right? Some of the hyperscalers have done all 3, right? Network, storage, security, right? And then AI and others will follow. So it's not that we are coming up with something totally new. We are just, the effort is to how do we make it standard so that you can others could run independent of the DPU, IPU vendor, right?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, if you look at the roadmap, and this is, again, not being very specific, but generally in many cases, I think the first thing that will happen will be the networking. So for storage, it'll be the storage networking can move to, be addressed through OPI. And then for AI, it'll be the AI connectivity and networking. And then for security, it'll be the networking. And then the next step is, in some cases, offloading maybe some of the management plane or control plane to run on the DPU or IPU. Because I think pretty much all the vendors, DPUs or IPUs have some kind of processor cores that can run part of the workload. And then the third use case, which comes maybe a little bit more advanced than doing the networking, is moving some specific functionality. So specific storage functionality or AI offloads or security, features to, offloading that to the DPU. And so that could be a special type of packet inspection or regular expression checking. It could be storage provisioning with related to SPDK or NVMe fabrics. It could be some specific AI offloads that speed up certain AI use cases. So Yeah, I think most of the use cases will start with the networking and then progress from there.
Yeah, we have a new sub-project called NIC software under OCP networking that is working on specifying vendor agnostic interfaces for crypto offload and a few other offload functions. So I would encourage you to get in touch with that sub-project to see if there's any collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we saw a couple of existing work. I forgot the specifics, but there's AT&T and a couple of others have done some kind of a standard offload. Of course, there are a lot of implementations with all the big cloud service providers, but there's an open source work. That's one, and absolutely, I think OCP NIC group is doing some very interesting work. I think we definitely have to work very closely so we don't duplicate anything, but anything that is done there, we want to take it. And then because this is multi-vendor, and then I think it may take some time for OCP to standardize the IPU, DPU. Again, that's how I read it. And then, but some of the work that's happening in that NIC group is going to be absolutely useful and relevant.
Yeah, I think
working closely is important.
Smart NICs, but mostly in offload functions.
Yeah.
They have a talk about it tomorrow.
Yes, absolutely. I think the concepts are very similar, right? Offloads are there for a while, but I think as we do that, we very clearly don't want to replicate anything, right? And anything that's good there, we want to shamelessly copy that and give them credit, right? I think that's a rule number one for us. And then build on top, because when you add programmability and IPUs, DPUs bring in something more, and again discuss that in an open way, and then make sure that it's a community-driven standard API that can work on multi-vendors. That's absolutely the tenet for us. Don't have any other questions? Thank you.